Hey, my name is Russ. I'm just really excited you guys are here. And we are about to enter part 2 of our 4-part series. But before we get to that, I don't know about you, but I reached this age sometime in my 20s when people stopped asking me to babysit and they started asking me to house sit. We got some house sitters, right? Yeah, I don't know what it was. I think just all of a sudden becoming like a grown man, people were like, you can't watch my kids anymore, but I have this house. And so what I found out about house sitting is I thought it was a promotion, but it's actually not, because you get paid per day rather than per hour. And it's not like an insane amount of money, and you're taking care of like plants or a dog. And as long as they survive, I guess you did a good job. So it's not like babysitting. But then every once in a while, you get asked to house sit at a house that has some teenage boys or something. Some teenagers, they're too old for babysitting, but their parents don't trust them, you know? Yeah, you guys were those people. And so my wife and I were married at this point. And I guess that's what you do with wives. And so someone asked us to house sit. And at this point, we were living in New Canaan, which sounds really bougie, but it wasn't. Our apartment, the floors were so slanted in the kitchen that we would invite the neighborhood kids over to sled in our kitchen. Yeah, you just get a sleeping bag and you give them a little push, and they'd go from one end of the kitchen all the way to the other. It was awesome. And so when we got offered the chance to house sit at this ridiculous house in New Canaan, it looked like someone stuck a Looney Tunes pump in it and was just pumped it up to silly size. So we were like, yes, I would love to pretend this is my house for a week. So the one catch, the reason why they wanted the house sitting from the beginning was because they had this 9th grade boy. And so I guess I misunderstood the job. I was there for the house, and for all the things in the house, I found a jar of money. I didn't know if I was allowed to use it or not. And so we just used everything. It was great. Bought food, had a cool house, a shower with 6 shower heads in it. It's I didn't know, what's the point of all these shower heads? You could turn a variety of them on. It was a big upgrade from our house. And so I decided, I was I gotta go a little bit further, because I don't want to just do an on-par job. I want to do a spectacular job. So I asked the high school boy if he wanted to play a game with Bree and I. My wife's name's Bree. He was sure. I was yes. All right, how about the game of life? Because they didn't have a lot of good games, and I love games in general. And so I was life is nostalgic. If any of you guys haven't played life, you go across the board pretending you're this person, and you get a job, and eventually you could buy a house. And then eventually you have kids and you retire, and anything that can happen in life, in real life, can pretty much happen in the game. It sounds more exciting than it is. It's actually not a very exciting game. And so we started playing it, and for just purposes of keeping this kid, who's now an adult, anonymous, I'm going to call him Trevor. So playing with Trevor, just playing the game, I always choose the entertainer if I can, because the entertainer, they don't have a limit on how many raises they can get. And they don't specify what type of entertainer I could be, so I could be whatever I want. Because if you're a police officer, you're pigeonholed as a police officer. But if I'm an entertainer, I could be whatever. So I love the entertainer. And so I'm living my entertainer life, spinning, going around the board. I'm doing great. And then Trevor is just somebody who everything is going his way. It just started to get frustrating. So I was what kind of anointing does this kid have on his life where he spins the perfect number every single time? Because the way you move around the board, you spin, then you move that many spaces. And he landed on every single prize tile there was. He was getting life tiles like crazy, and he's accumulating them. He had a big stack of them. And then there's this one spot called the lawsuit. And you could sue anybody for $100,000, which is fake money, so it doesn't really matter. But he kept suing me. And it was so frustrating. So frustrating, because I was winning. And in life, it's all chance to just spinning. But I wanted to win. I didn't care. I was there to win, and also have a good report at the end of the week that I played with this kid. And so he just kept landing on everything, and I realized we were coming to the end, and I was this is my moment. If I make it to Millionaire Estates, I might be able to get one of those life tiles, and that will tip me over the edge of beating Trevor. And then right before I get there, he's I quit. He's I've been cheating the whole time anyways. And I was yeah! Right? I was about to flip the table over. I couldn't believe it, because I was I thought he had some sort of blessing on his life. It was a lie. And I felt so deceived, because I was how stupid of me, right? every time he spun, he even explained it. He's like, every time I spun, I just went as many spaces as I wanted. And I was like, how did I not see this? I guess I just trust everybody. So I trusted him to go the right number of spaces if that's how many spaces he spun. And it was so infuriating. It's like, Trevor, I thought you had some sort of divine favor on your life. He didn't. So, but I have the good news, 2 weeks in a row, and the opportunity to share with you about someone who actually does have favor on their life. And I can tell you what false favor looks like. It looks like Trevor cheating. But I can show you what true favor looks like. It looks like this guy named Joseph. I almost called him Joshua. There's a lot of J names. Joseph. And what we saw last week of Joseph, just in case you missed it, is Joseph was one of 12 brothers, second youngest. And his brothers hated him. Like, they really hated him. And it had nothing to do that he was the favorite, but he was the favorite of his dad. And everybody knew it because he wore this ridiculous robe that his dad made for him, covered in bells. He's jingling all over the place. And the bell robe showed that he wasn't going to get dirty. So he wasn't going to work, but all of his other brothers and everybody else was going to get dirty, and they were going to work. And he was held back from the work, and his dad loved him. He loved being the favorite. And his brothers were like, all right, we're going to kill him. They're like, no, he's our brother. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him as a slave. So they sell him as a slave. His life falls apart. But before that, forgot, this is a key point. This is like one of the main points of my last message. He had these dreams from God. And God showed him that he was going to do a work so grand that his brother's work was going to bow down and submit before it because it was so much greater than the work that they've done. And then eventually they were going to bow down to Joseph because of who Joseph was. And so they end up selling him as a slave. His life falls apart, not because of anything particular he did, just because he was him. And now we pick it up where he is bought by this person named Potiphar, who's an official in Egypt. And also, as you can see behind me, this is something that is also part of our theme. We're calling our series Canvas Work. And canvas work, I don't imagine any of you guys are familiar with it. I talked to my grandma about it this week, and she corrected me with a whole bunch of stuff I got wrong. But canvas work is a type of needlepoint. It's a type of artwork. And usually you have a piece of canvas, like you see up there, stretched over a wooden frame, and you take needles with colored thread on it, and you push through the top, pull through the bottom, cut it, tie it in a knot, and then snip it. And so when you're doing canvas work, there's a design in mind. You usually take like a stencil of some sort, or you draw something on the top. And so as the artist, you're working towards completing the picture. And there's intention behind each thread because, like in an oil painting, if you mess up, you have a couple options. You could like scrape it off, or you could just paint over it, or you could throw Campbell's soup at it in like 600 years. It just depends, whatever you want to do to cover it up. But with needlepoint, there's nothing you can do. You have to have intention. You only get one needle, one thread per hole. And so the top side, you get to see the progress. The artist gets to know where it's going and what color needs to come next. And on the bottom side, it's just a disaster. You can see that work is being done, but you can't actually see where it's going. You can't see the design on the top. It's just you see the evidence of the work. And you can take guesses. I actually have, this is the underside of a very well-known piece of art. And so this is a needlepoint. So does anybody have a guess what this is? What piece of art this is? Anybody? Just, what? A what? A wreath. Oh, that's a great guess. You got red and green in there? Yeah, okay. All right. Anybody else have a guess at what this could possibly be? Sprite logo. That's pretty good. That's really good. Anybody else? I'm giving you guys free opportunities to scream. You do whatever you want. Poison ivy. That was good. What? Holly and ivy. You guys are going Christmassy. I guess it makes sense, green and red. So that's the thing. In our context, God sees the top side of the canvas. He's working in our life, and he's with intention, putting our canvas work together. And he's working in our lives. He has a special design for our lives that he's making this beautiful canvas. But us, we're on the underside. And so we look up and we see there's evidence of God working, but we can't tell exactly where he's going. Like looking at a third of the picture, it's hard to see where the rest of it is. And it's funny, when Kevin saw this earlier, he asked, he's like, it looks like the rest of it's downloading. Where's the rest of it? Exactly. I didn't want to show you guys the whole thing all at once, because this is what we get on our side. Sometimes in our lives we see that God is at work, but we have no idea where it's going or what the full design is until we get to a certain point where we can look back and we see the completed canvas and we're like, oh, of course, that's so cool how God wove together those points in my life to bring me where I am. So that's our recap. So there was one point I made last week I wanted to reiterate before we get going, and it was this. Even when humans intend to ruin what God meant for good, he won't let us. His promises are too good. Because Joseph's brothers, they intended evil for Joseph by selling him as a slave. But we're going to get to see how God redeems his life over and over again. It's awesome. So last week we had the dreams of hope, and then this week we have Joseph sold as a slave in Egypt to Potiphar. And we're going to pick up in the story. We're going to see, I want to remind you, I'm going to read a chunk of text because this is a story. I want you guys to get the whole picture. And then I'm going to talk about it afterwards. We're going to take a deep look at it after I read the whole thing. So Joseph's been sold to Potiphar, and this is where we pick up. It's Genesis 39. And I want to remind you, this is a book. Feel free to go and read it yourself. Genesis 37, this is 39. Go read it. You can flip forward and back and see what happens to Joseph. If you have anxiety after this and not knowing what's going to happen next, feel free to go check it out. Genesis 39, this is 1 through 21. It goes like this. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. So his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. And when she saw he had left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house, she called to her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me because I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So growing up in the church, this is one of those passages where stuff happens where you can just easily look over it and just accept it as it is. Like in the first 3 lines, it says the Lord was with Joseph and blah, 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 blah. And that's one of those things where we just say, like, yeah, of course the Lord was with Joseph. But have you ever asked, like, why was the Lord with Joseph? Because it doesn't say. It just assumes that we know why. And so this is one of those questions. I got into some why questions last week. It's like, I want to know why. When the Bible says something, I want to know why. And this is one of those things. I'm like, why was the Lord with Joseph? Like, what was so special about Joseph that the Lord was like, you know what? I'm going to be with you because you just got sold as a slave to Potiphar. There's a reason, and I want to tell you the reason. So the Lord is with Joseph and blesses Joseph with his favor. And the reason why is because Joseph's great-grandpa is Abraham. And this is like, old, a couple generations back. This is Genesis. This is like really early time. God made a covenant with Abraham saying, Abraham, I'm going to bless the world through your offspring. And so and he's like, I'm going to be with your descendants. I'm going to bless the world through them. So Joseph is the great-grandson of Abraham who God made the covenant with. And so Joseph is blessed and has favor of the Lord and blesses Potiphar all because of something Joseph's great-grandfather does. And what's really cool is believers today, like you and me, we have a covenant through Jesus. And it's a new covenant. And so the old covenant that God made with Abraham is like a flip phone. It's like when I first got my flip phone when I was 16, it had a color screen, and my siblings were mad because theirs were like still like green and black. And I was like, yes. And so it texted, it called, and it was great. There's no camera on it. And the new covenant with Jesus is like a smartphone. It could do everything that the old covenant could do. It could text. You can make phone calls. You guys are like, of course phones could do that, right? But it could do so much more. That's the covenant with Jesus. And believers today, we have that covenant with Jesus, and we can bless future generations of our kids and our kids and our kids' kids' kids because of our covenant with Jesus. If you don't have a family yet, don't worry, because Abraham didn't either. When God made this covenant with Abraham, he's like, hey, I'm going to bless the world through your kids. And Abraham didn't have any kids. And even when he tried to take it into his own hands and do it his way, it didn't work out really well. God didn't take that favor from him and that covenant from him. And so we have this covenant. You can do it for kids even if you don't have children yet. You can start blessing your family now through your covenant with Jesus, which is awesome. All right, deeper look at how the Lord being with Joseph is going to play out. We see Joseph in the last chapter from last week. He's this spoiled kid. He has a jingly colored robe on, right? Not allowed to work. He's held back. Then all of a sudden in this passage, we see Joseph is an invaluable worker. Everything he does, he's prosperous in. The Lord makes him prosperous. How does this happen, right? There's a Netflix show about this. You know this? Where they take spoiled kids and they put them into hard jobs and they just record them, right? They're just like, so hard, right? That's Joseph. Have you ever heard of a spoiled kid? Think of like any kid at your high school, super spoiled, really annoying, and they get their first job because their parents make them get a job. They go work at like Stop and Shop. You've never heard like, wow, this kid is the best worker I've ever had, right? It doesn't happen, but it happened with Joseph. So why? And also I want to know how. How is Joseph so prosperous? Like, did someone figure out that Joseph he had the favor of the Lord? So like, Joseph, go stand in that field while it grows. And he's like, okay. And he just goes and stand in this field that Joseph's standing in grows like twice as tall. Or they're like, Joseph, take care of these flowers. And he's holding the flowers, and they walk away and come back, and there's 2 flowers. Is it like a passive thing? It doesn't say. But the Lord gave him success in everything he did. And then he found favor with Potiphar. I have questions about this. So Joseph comes as a foreigner to Egypt. He doesn't speak the language. He has no workable skills, right? And he probably wasn't given an important job to start with. And the only thing I know about servants and slaves and stuff comes from Downton Abbey. I don't know if you watched that. But it's too modern, right? They're in a house, and there's butlers and doormen. So I was trying to figure out what ancient slaves and servants would have jobs as, because I want to know what type of job Joseph got. And so what I found was in ancient Egypt, there were your slaves, if you were able to afford them, could be miners, like they're going to the mine to mine gold and gems and all that stuff, like a dwarf from Lord of the Rings. Or they're a gardener, or they're a shepherd, which that was my leading one. So I'm like, Joseph comes from a shepherding family. He's got to have some sort of knowledge, right? So he's probably a shepherd. But there's still more. Another one is like caretaker of kids, think au pairs, or house cleaner, cleaning floors. But one thing it says that I think is really interesting is the Bible says how handsome Joseph is. How many times in the Bible does it call somebody handsome? I don't know. Not very much, right? It's like he must be really handsome. I imagine the person who wrote the Bible knows what handsome people look like, right? I don't know. I know Ryan Gosling's handsome. I would write that if I was writing this. I'd be like, yes, he looks like Ryan Gosling. He's handsome. So the thing about servants, this is just me guessing. I'm imagining right now. If you have a handsome servant, you want him in the house, right? Because when you have a party, you want to be like, check out my handsome servants. You don't want to just be like, unless you're P.T. Barnum, you're like, look at my freak show, right? When you have family over, you want your handsome, your most beautiful servants around to serve your guests because that's what like high-profile people do. They want to be surrounded by beautiful people. So I'm guessing then Joseph wasn't taking care of the kids since he couldn't talk to the kids. He didn't speak the language. So I'm guessing, still guessing, that he was probably a house cleaner. So he's cleaning the house so well, and he's cleaning the house in a way that he gets Potiphar's attention. They probably weren't interacting very much, right? And how good of a worker did he have to be in like a meeting of like the officials in Potiphar's house? He's like, so tell me about the new slaves. And he's like, well, that one guy's a really good worker. And then Potiphar's like, oh, the favor of the Lord's upon him. No, right? I think it came from direct interaction with Joseph. So whatever job Joseph had, I'm pretty sure it was a house cleaner. He's cleaning the floors. Whatever job he had, he did it in such a way that the Lord revealed himself to Potiphar. And I think that's interesting because a lot of times I overlook that part and I just see Joseph becoming the attendant. And then I'm like, of course, through that close connection, if you're in charge of everything, you're going to be able to know a lot about each other and see the favor of the Lord on Joseph from Potiphar's point of view. But Joseph Joseph revealed the Lord to his boss before the promotion and the status came. But I'm sure Joseph is cleaning the floors. He's got the dreams in mind because the dreams are the canvas, right? He's like, I know the destination. I know where I'm going to do work that my brothers are going to bow down to. And I'm going to be in a place where my brothers are going to surround me and just bow down to me because I'm me. And he's cleaning the floors with that in mind. And I don't know much about Joseph, but I know me. And if that was me, I'd have two mindsets I could pick from. I have this defeatist mindset where I'd be cleaning the floors being like, God, how is this possibly work that's worth bowing down to? But that's the defeatist mindset. I get in that mindset sometimes. I feel like the other mindset that Joseph could have been in is he says, I'm going to clean these floors like this work is worth being bowed down to. And that's the type of response that I feel like God revealed himself to Joseph's boss by the way that he worked. If he was working with that mindset, like, how is this possibly work that's worth bowing down to? I think everyone would see the defeatist attitude. But God revealed himself to Joseph's boss by the way that Joseph stewarded his favor through his work. So I got married right out of college, had a ministry degree, and I got into the ministry right away. Full-time work. I was like, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. It did not work out. Quit after 2 years, and I was like, man, feeling like a failure. What am I supposed to do? I thought I was supposed to work in ministry. I thought this was like my calling on my life. And so just to make ends meet, because we have car payments and student loans and all that stuff, I got a job at UPS, Honey Spot Road in Stratford, if anybody works there. Woo, UPS. And I was working nights, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. It's like zombie land. Just to make ends meet, and I moved back in with my parents. That wasn't cool. I was married. It was really hard. Having this job, just the position that I had, the general population of UPS didn't like us because we all shared this position that like we were supposed to be like, watching them. So going in and then day one, my boss is like, I'm going to give you an easy assignment. You're going to take brown belt. And just so you know, there's a guy there named George, and he's going to hate you. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. I was there to pay the bills. And so I go to brown belt. I meet a cool guy named Charlie. And then I meet George. And George is just this old guy. Is actually heartbreaking right away because you're like, I don't want anybody this age to be working, especially in like a physical, dangerous environment that this was. And George hated me. From like the moment I walked onto the belt, he hated me. And this man had a lot of hurt in his life. There was people that must have looked very much like me that had hurt him in a lot of ways. And that was coming out in our interactions from day one. He would like throw packages, would stare at me, or like kick packages and then stare at me. he would just say terrible, unrepeatable things to me, trying to tear me down. And he actually said the most offensive thing I have ever heard in my life that truly cut me to the core without even using any bad words. It's just like normal, you can say them here. It'd be terribly offensive, I'm not gonna say it, but it was just like, he knew how to hurt my feelings, and I dreaded going to work. I would like wake up in the morning, I guess in the afternoon, and just be like, I can't go in again. But I knew I had to pay the bills, so I was going in. And with my family, because I had a kid at this point, it was like zombie mode with my kid. He was only awake for like 2 hours before he went to bed every day. It was rough. And I didn't know what I wanted to do for a job, but I was like, it is not this. There was a greater purpose to my work, though I had no idea at the time. I wish I knew that God was using my position, my unpreferred circumstances, to reveal himself to my coworkers, like George and my boss. And the Lord will use our unpreferred circumstances to reveal himself to our coworkers. It's really awesome. Maybe that resonates with you. That the job that you're working or the place that you're living in or the role that you're in right now is not what you were expecting. It's not what you wanted. And you're struggling. And this isn't the place you imagined yourself going. And you know what? You don't need the ministry position. You don't need to live in a special place. You don't need to have a special job for the Lord to use your unpreferred circumstances to reveal himself to the people around you. God has a design in mind for you. It doesn't mean that you're stuck or that you need to suffer. He's going to reveal himself to your coworkers through the way that you work. How are you stewarding the favor of the Lord in this season? How are you stewarding the favor of the Lord in your work? Another look at Joseph and Potiphar. I don't know how relationships usually go with a slave and a slave master, but I imagine they're probably not good. I feel like we could all probably say that, right? Joseph was prosperous in everything he did because of the Lord's favor on his life. And the passage says that the favor of the Lord was on Joseph, and that once Potiphar put Joseph in charge of everything, then Potiphar was blessed. So Joseph had a choice. He could have said, you know what, Potiphar is wanting to promote me. I'm not going to do it. Or I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to do a terrible job. I've had relationships with bosses like this where I'm like, I don't want this person to look good. I don't want this person to succeed. And that's not a good place to be, but I'm sure some of you can relate with that. We have bosses that we don't want to make look good. So is it possible that Joseph could have withheld his blessing from Potiphar? Withheld the favor so that Potiphar wouldn't be blessed? And are you holding back the blessing that God has put in your life because you don't like somebody? Are you holding back the blessing God has put on your life because you don't like your coworkers, because you don't like your boss? And God redeemed Joseph's circumstances. He'll redeem yours as well. God revealed himself to Potiphar through the way Joseph stewarded his favor in his work. And he will do the same for us right now because of the covenant we have with Jesus. God will reveal himself to your coworkers, your fellow students, because of the favor and through the favor he has in your life, in your work, whether it's your school work or your work at work. The Lord is with you, revealing himself to the people around you through your work. And so what I'm thinking is we have two questions we need to ask ourselves when we go to work. One, am I going to work in a way that reveals the Lord to my coworkers? And two, am I holding back the blessing God has put on my life because I don't like someone? Am I going to work in a way that reveals the Lord to my coworkers? And am I holding back the blessing God has put on my life because I don't like someone? Moving on in the text, we see Joseph encountering Potiphar's wife. And all of a sudden, he's had this rapid ascent. He started being sold twice as a slave. This isn't even the first time he sold as a slave, it's the second time. So he's known, his history is a slave. He goes from being a slave to all of a sudden this rapid ascent. He's put in charge of a whole entire household of an official. He's no longer just a slave. He has teams of slaves underneath him. He probably has slaves change his clothes for him. He's in charge of the whole entire house. He's at this super rapid ascent, and then all of a sudden, the one thing that's been withheld from him, Potiphar's wife. Potiphar was like, you can have everything except my wife. One thing withheld from him, and when it's offered to him, he turns it down. So how did Joseph go from this spoiled kid to all of a sudden being this man of integrity? There's a lot of people in history, not just Christian history, but in Christian history as well, that when offered with something that was being withheld from them, they took it and they failed morally. But Joseph, all of a sudden, he's a man of integrity. Where'd this come from? It's awesome. I love looking at Joseph's response. So his first response, boom, first interaction where she all of a sudden has eyes for him, and she's like, I'm having Joseph. She says, come to bed with me. And Joseph responds like this in verse 9. He says, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Joseph doesn't say, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against Potiphar? Joseph is more concerned with the favor, with his relationship with God, and with the blessing that God has for his life than pleasing Potiphar. We've all been tempted before. There's some harmless temptations. I've been gluten-free because my wife is gluten-free for 10 years. She's been gluten-free a lot longer than that. She comes from a family of intolerances and allergies. And so to stand together, I've been gluten-free. So let's say I'm gluten-free and someone brings over cannolis. I was tempted. I gave in. Harmless, mostly, right? But then there's harmful sin too that could lead us to sinning against God. This is something really interesting about temptation that was reiterated to me this week by somebody, and it blew my mind. I was like, wow, I forgot, right? Temptation. When it comes to temptation, the temptation itself isn't sin. You haven't failed because you were tempted. And I think a lot of times because of just things that we encounter on our phones and on Instagram, it's like when temptation comes, I feel like I've already failed. I don't know if any of you can relate with that, but it is not the temptation that's a sin. Jesus was tempted in every way, and he didn't sin. And so we have a choice when we're tempted. Either we could go into sin or we can flee. And temptation isn't just a one-time battle. It's a long con. As con men go, it's playing the long con. So the way temptation goes is this. Let's say I'm at a party. Let's say it's a wedding. We're just pretending anyways. It's a cool wedding reception. My wife and I walk in, and all of a sudden there's this really big buffet table full of cannolis and eclairs and Boston cream donuts and croissants. Yes, and almond croissants, and chocolate croissants. Anything with flaky crust, I guess, is there. And I look at it, and I know she would be disappointed in me if I took any of the pastries. So I go over. I don't even go over. I know the smell is over there, and that's going to lead me even worse. So I say no, and I win. And I'm like, yes, let's go, Russ. You didn't do it. You didn't eat those non-gluten-free pastries. They're glutinous. But then we're socializing, and I'm talking to people, and I'm trying to maintain eye contact because the servers have started walking around with the pastries on trays, and I keep looking at them. They keep drawing my eyes. I can smell them. They look delicious. I say, no. I won the second battle. But then my wife goes to the bathroom. I'm alone. And I say, surely, if the servers come around again, it's meant to be. It's a part of the design. And so a server starts walking with a tray, and I walk into the path of the server because I know where he's going. And so he walks by and he says, do you want some? And I would like some. And I tell myself, I just want to know how much they weigh in my hands because I haven't felt a pastry in a long time. And if you're wondering why all the bread in the bread aisles of grocery stores is squished, it's because gluten-free people forget the texture and they want to go and touch them. It's true. Go grocery shopping with my wife. We squeeze all the breads if they're in bags. And so I'm holding them, and I'm like, yes, this is just the weight I expected it to feel like. And I could smell them. And then by the time she comes out of the bathroom, I'm half a dozen in, and I can't help myself. That's the way sin works. For me, I celebrate that first victory. I'm like, let's go. I resisted the first time. But guess what? I gave all of that energy to that first no, and I've let my guard down. And temptation keeps coming back, and my guard is down, and I'm like, but if it's wrong the first time, I'm telling you, it's going to be wrong every time. Joseph's temptation wasn't an easy pass, and I feel like we look at it like, because it's on a Bible, it's like, oh, of course he did. Of course he could do it. But it was a major temptation. Day one, she comes up, go to bed with me. And Potiphar's wife, probably very, 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 very pretty, okay? Official's wife. So he says no, and he's like, yes, good job, Joseph, you did it, you resisted. But you know what? She comes back day after day, and he's still saying no. And she's only getting more vigorous. She's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get Joseph. He sets up boundaries. It's incredible. I've been reading a book about boundaries. Joseph didn't even need to do that. He set up boundaries. He said he wouldn't even go. He wouldn't speak with her. He wouldn't be with her. He set up boundaries. And guess what? She still found him through his boundaries. She set it up perfectly. And then the last time, he still resisted. It's incredible. Joseph kept the dreams at the forefront of his mind because he knew his destination. The one thing that Joseph had was he saw the bottom side of the canvas work. He saw that it was incomplete. He knew a section of it. He knew God was working in his life. And he's like, I am not putting the promises and the favor that God has for my life at risk for this temptation. And by standing against the temptation, you're protecting the favor and the promises that God has in your life. What are the temptations that the enemy is throwing at you? What are the temptations that the enemy is throwing at you? He's trying to take your favor and your promises. So when I was working at UPS, I got a nickname really fast, Richie Cunningham. And if you don't know who Richie Cunningham is, it's okay. It's an old show. It's from the Wonder Years. Am I right? Not the Wonder Years. Happy Days. Of course it was. I was close. They're all the same. Just kidding. Don't say that. So Richie Cunningham is this like straight-laced, he has red hair, combed over, doesn't break the rules, really nerdy, white guy. And I guess I looked like him, and I acted like him. And so, yeah, everyone called me Richie, and no one knew my name. I was just Richie. And yeah, it was so. Part of the reason why I got the name Richie Cunningham is because I just didn't lie. Got me in trouble a few times. And I built up a reputation for it really quick because my boss asked us to forge some paperwork. And there was financial incentive in it for me to forge this paperwork saying certain things. And I was the only one who didn't do it. And you could cheer, but for me at the time, I had car payments. I had a child. I was living with my parents. I was like, come on, student loans. Those things follow you after death. I was like, I need to get away from these. And so that financial incentive was looking pretty good. And then this union rep, at this point, I'm sure it still is, but at this point, the UPS's union was the strongest union in the world. And this union rep came by and asked me a bunch of questions. And I told him the truth, and I got a bunch of trouble. I had lines I was supposed to feed him, but I couldn't do it. I was like, I want the money, but I know that I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I did this. So every time the union rep came by after that, my boss would hide me. He'd have me do like little jobs around that were like completely time wasting. I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm like shuffling envelopes. He wanted to keep me away because he knew I wouldn't lie. So when temptation comes for you at work, keep a finished canvas view, like Joseph with the promises, the promise and the favor in mind. And the rewards for compromise can be really obvious. For me, it was financial. But maybe for you, it's like financial, it's fitting with your coworkers. And the rewards for doing the right thing either sometimes don't come or you don't see them on earth. That's something we'll see in heaven. Joseph's reward for doing the right thing, prison. So Joseph's life has fallen apart for a second time. And why? It was inside his control this time too. It's because he did the right thing. So I'm sure Joseph is frustrated. His life is turning around. He went from being like a lowly slave to having like this household underneath him. And then he ends up in prison. for doing the right thing. And I'm sure you guys can relate with this because I could. I'm like, God, I'm doing what you wanted me to do. I'm doing the right thing, so how come this bad stuff keeps happening? Joseph's like, I was supposed to have this job that people were going to bow down to. Surely that job was worth bowing down to, right? I had teams of people underneath me. What's going on, God? I thought this is what you wanted. I thought I was doing the right thing. He goes from having this role of just being this son of somebody in Canaan, then a slave, to this like high up guy running the house. Surely that, if anything, if that was my guess, when I was Joseph, I'd be like, this is it. I've made it. My brother's going to come around soon and bow down to me. And he lost it because he did the right thing. God is going to redeem what was meant for evil for good, including what Potiphar's wife meant for evil for good. Because God has a design in mind for Joseph, and that includes favor and promises, and he is going to turn what was meant for evil for good. Even though she tried to ruin it, because of something I said at the beginning of the message, I said, even when humans intend to ruin what God meant for good, he won't let us. His promises are too good. So the reward for Joseph doing the right thing was that he lost the job, but he didn't lose the Lord's favor. He lost the job, but he did not lose the favor. And where do we see Joseph at the end? Joseph is in prison. It says the Lord is with him and that he's already found favor in the prison. So I have a question for you as we close. Are you stewarding the Lord's favor in your life? Are you stewarding the Lord's favor in your life? Are you working in a way that's revealing the Lord to your coworkers? And are you protecting the blessings and the favor that the Lord's put on your life when temptation comes? Our role is to steward, and God's role is going to fulfill the results. We have to trust God for the results. And I pray for you guys this week that you would see not only the Lord weaving those threads, showing you that he's working, but when temptation comes, I'm praying favor and blessing over you. That when the temptation comes, you would have that canvas, that whole completed canvas in mind, that promise in mind, and that you'd protect your favor and your promises. In the name of Jesus.